Thank you so much for joining us for this Holding Court episode of the Dukes of Dice, and I'm joined from across the pond by Paul Grogan from Gaming Rules. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Thank you very much for having me on the show, Alex.
Oh, it's fantastic having you. And we try on Holding Court to have a variety of guests, not just designers, not just, say, artists or publishers, but also folks who come into the industry from a different perspective. And I think you're going to provide that. So Paul, for background for folks, what is Gaming Rules?
Gaming Rules is a company. I set it up about 3.5 years ago now to basically, the tagline is that I provide consultancy services to games publishers, but it goes beyond that. The main aspects of my work is that I write and edit rulebooks, and I do dozens of them a year. I've lost track of how many I do. I create instructional videos that are purely instructional, so not reviews or endorsements or anything like that, just purely rules videos on teaching you how to play a game. I attend various conventions where I work for companies doing demos of games, but I also do game development, playtesting services and everything. The tagline of the company is making your game as good as it can be. And I try my best to do that and provide my input on it, from everything from, the rules of the game, the graphic design of the game, how the game plays, right through to then producing the rulebook and the how to play videos and everything else. So yeah, it's enough to keep me busy, and then some.
So with that being said, and that background there, let's get into the actual background. And how did you get into gaming, Paul?
Well, I mean, I've been a gamer from when I was very, very young. I'm an only child, and I have a few memories of when I was like super, super young. So probably like pre-10 years old or something like that. Playing games at home in my bedroom. I mean, we're talking the games that was around in the 70s. So Mousetrap and, Game of Life and things like that, and Spyring. But I was always very, very keen on gaming. When I hit about 12 or 13 years old, so this was early 80s, the Fighting Fantasy books came out. And I was always interested in fantasy and sci-fi. I was always a bit of a geek with regards to that, although the term geek wasn't around at that time. But yeah, I was always into that kind of stuff. And I got into these Fighting Fantasy books, and they were like, oh, they were great. Now, these books were being sold in a shop where the guy who ran it played D&D. And all of a sudden, we got introduced into D&D, because he used to stock some of those games in his shop along with the books as well. And we got into D&D, and, played a lot of that, got involved in more and more gaming. Over the years, I've done all sorts. I've done role-playing game, I've done wargaming, I've done board gaming, I've done collectible card games to a very high level. And I don't mean high level in that I was really good. I mean, I was a DCI level 3 judge, and I was judging at Pro Tours and national events and things like that. Board gaming wise, it was about 1998 to 1999. When basically I was playing Magic the Gathering and nothing else. It had completely taken over my life. And that's all I was doing. And then I just quit. And I went cold turkey on it, and I stopped and sold everything. And thankfully, the local club that I was attending at the time, there was a group of people in the corner playing board games. So 2/3 of the club was playing Magic the Gathering, and that's what I did. But then when I stopped playing Magic the Gathering, I thought, I'll wander over there and see what those guys are doing. And they were playing board games. So they were playing Primordial Soup, Settlers of Catan, Formula D, things like that. Games which I've now since moved on from myself, and I don't generally play them, but that's what they were playing, and that got me into board gaming, and I went, oh, this is good. Right, I'll do this instead of Magic. And that's it. So since about 98, 99, I've been seriously into board games, and a lot of the other stuff that I used to do has now stopped. I stopped doing role-playing games when I moved away from Hertfordshire, so that was 2007. I've not done any war games or miniatures games or anything like that for a long, long time. I dabble with the odd CCG here and there, but not really. So board gaming is now my thing.
What was the first game that you truly loved?
Well, this would be going back to what I was saying earlier on when I was a kid. There was a game that was around in the 70s by Waddington's called Spyring. And anybody who's my age who's listening to this may remember this game. But because I was always into, sci-fi and fantasy. I was always into spies and James Bond and everything else. In this game, you had little plastic pieces that moved around the board, and you put little bits of metal in their heads, which represented the fact that they were on the radio or something. You sent coded signals to each other. I remember very little about it, but I just remember loving it as a kid. Now, if I was to find that game now, it's probably still at home somewhere with my parents, and get the rules of it, I'd read through it and I'd be like, what? Seriously? This is not even a game. It's probably just roll a dice, move that number of spaces, draw a card, do what it says. But at the time, I absolutely loved it. So I'd probably have to say that was my very first game that I loved, even though it was, 40 years ago.
When's the last time you broke it out?
Well, I've not seen it for 30 years, so I don't even know if it is still in the family somewhere.
I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on kind of going back to that experience, because nostalgia can color a lot of things, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, even going back to the games that I got really into, as I say, in the late 90s, so 98, 99, 2000, all those games then that I played and got, and I thought, wow, this is great, this is fantastic. Some of them, I now look back at them and go, yeah, I'm never going to play that again. But not all of them. I'm not saying that everything from 20 years ago is now unplayable. The other week we played Acquire. I mean, how old's Acquire? but we played it a couple of weeks ago, and actually that one was like, okay, so this is better than I remembered. See, when in the 20 years almost since I've been into serious gaming, I've been through various phases. And probably 10 years ago, I was the elitist jerk that would look down on anything that had random elements and just go, whoa, it's too random. And I looked back at my rating on BGG for Acquire, which was like 4, way too random, never play this again. Whereas now, I played it and I was like, okay, I can see that there is the randomness of the tile draw, and there's a little bit too much downtime with 6. I'm still, critical of those points, but did I enjoy playing this game? Yeah, I did. Therefore, it was good. So I'm a little bit more relaxed about things and not quite on my high horse about things. Anyway, Spyring 1965. Wow. Yeah, I'm just looking it up on BGG now. Yeah, it's got a rating of 5.3. There you go. Yeah, we'll give that one a miss.
How did you get? Where did the interest in rules come about?
Well, it's funny because when I started Gaming Rules as a company, the whole idea was that I wanted to make instructional videos. It wasn't to do rulebook editing, which is now what I'm probably most known for. Well, it's probably 50-50. A lot of people know that I create the rules videos. A lot of people know me as a rulebook editor, and some people know that I do both. But when I started Gaming Rules, it was purely to create the instructional videos and not really to get involved in rulebooks. And then as I started getting I'd done bits of rulebook work. So I've done rulebooks with CGE, who, to be honest, CGE rulebooks were always really good. I get a lot of credit for the CGE rulebooks being good, and that's not fair on the people at CGE because their rulebooks were really good before I got involved. I just added a little bit. I've helped Watch Your Game with their rulebooks for the last few years as well, where I do a lot more with them than I do with CGE. But I think I can't remember exactly how it happened, but gradually over time, more and more people started asking me to do rulebooks, and then suddenly I'm a rulebook editor. I think it's because I know when I read a rulebook, it's not clear. You know yourself, when you're reading a rulebook and you're reading it and you're like, that paragraph didn't make any sense, or you've told me all about the 10 different actions that I can do, but you haven't actually told me what the game's about yet. You know when you're reading a rulebook if things are in the wrong order, because as you're reading it, you have that feeling of like, hang on a minute, this doesn't quite make sense. And because I am a very, very fussy person, I just basically translated that passion and my fussiness into, right, I'm going to start trying to make these rulebooks better. And yeah, kind of fell into it in a way. It's not like I've had any, professional training on, my English at school was terrible. I only just scraped through my English, and I've had to relearn how to use semicolons and em dashes and all of that sort of stuff. I've had to learn all of that. And, I don't have professional proofreading qualifications that you can get. But I feel that I know enough about it, and there's a lot of information that's freely available on the internet as well. And I've also spoken to a number of other professional proofreaders and editors about certain things that I was confused about, and they've helped me out clarifying a few things. So yeah, kind of just fell into it. But that's at least 50% of my job. I mean, I'm working on 5 rule books this month alone, which, you know, is a lot to have going on in your head all at once. It's not like I work on one and then I stop and it's finished. I'm working on most. So today I've been working on 3 different ones, kind of all at the same time. You know, because a lot of the time I'll work on a rule book and then I'll ask a number of questions to the designer and say this bit's doesn't make any sense, and then I might not hear back from them for 2 days. So then I need to move on to another one and so on and so forth. So yeah, having all of those rules in my head at the time, whilst also learning and playing new games as well. So I've just got a copy of Gentis, which Tasty Minstrel are launching a Kickstarter for the deluxeified version soon, and I'm doing the how to play video, which means I've got to get the game, I've got to learn the game, and I've got to learn it well enough to be able to come up with the best structured way of teaching somebody to be able to write the script for the video. I mean, I'm not complaining, I'm just saying I've got that going on whilst I'm writing and editing rulebooks for 5 other games at the same time. So, and that's not, yeah, well, that's not to mention, you know, we learned how to play Merlin this week and played that. So as a gamer, I am still learning new games and playing new games, which, you know, having the mental capacity to do all of that and then go back to other games is, as I said, it keeps me busy, very busy.
No kidding. Chris K. Ghidorah on our Board Game Geek Guild submitted this question. He was curious about really how you did decide to break into the business, or how you did decide to start Gaming Rules. Were there publisher connections beforehand, or was this something? How did it come about?
It's a very good question, and there were publisher connections beforehand. I've had a couple of people contact me over the last couple of years who said, "I want to do what you do. How do I get into it?" And I went, "It's not that easy. You can't just suddenly decide one day, right, I am now going to work full-time in the games industry and I'm going to start writing to all of these publishers and say, here's what I do." You can't do that. I had these publisher connections beforehand because I'm a massive... So Czech Games Edition, they were my favourite publisher. I say were my favourite publisher. I can't now say they're my favourite publisher, even if they were, because they're my employer, kind of. So I'm not going to say that. But I loved what they did, and I went along to Essen every year, and I got to know them, and I got to meet them, and I said, look, you guys are amazing. I love your games. These are fantastic. Is there anything that I can do for you? Is there any, you know, because I had a well-paid full-time job, and I was passionate about board games. When I'm passionate about something, I want to do more. I want to get involved in it, not for financial reasons, just because feeling rewarded for getting involved in something that is your passion and that you're happy about is a very rewarding thing. So I was getting involved in testing their games, helping do demos of their games, helping with their rule books, just doing all sorts of little bits on the side years before Gaming Rules was formed. And I was doing that for a couple of others as well. They'd give me a few copies of the game, which I'd sell to my friends, and I'd make like 50 quid for, you know, 100 hours work or something like that. You know, I wasn't doing it for financial reasons. But then the reason why Gaming Rules came about is my job wasn't working out. So, and this is going back about 5 or 6 years now, but things with my job at the time were really going downhill, to the point where most sensible people would have said, screw this, and left. Or they'd have done something about it. Well, I'm not that wise when it comes to these things. And I had a plan, I had a master plan, that when I was 50, I was going to leave my job. I would have had enough money to pay off my mortgage. This was the plan, okay? This hasn't happened, before anybody gets jealous. This was the master plan, because basically it was a well-paid job and I don't spend much money. So all of the money was being used to pay off the mortgage as quickly as possible. And then by the time I was 50, I would have very little overheads, and I'd be able to quit my job, and I'd be able to spend my days doing things that I wanted to do, like doing stuff in the games industry. But at the time, my plan was not to do that and really get paid for it, was just to do it on a voluntary basis because that's what I wanted to do. That was the plan. So every single day at work where I absolutely hated my job and I was being bullied and there was loads and loads of problems, I just went, right, well, that's one more day, only only 1,722 to go. And I'd literally tick off another day and count down the days. Whereas most people would have just quit the job. And I didn't. I was stubborn and I went, no, why should I quit? This isn't my problem that all of this is happening to me. But what it did is that it ground me down over such a period of time that in the end I couldn't take it anymore. And I did leave. But Gaming Rules was formed before I left as a safety net, because I didn't want to just, leave with nothing to go to. So I left with the fact that Gaming Rules had been formed. I'd already done bits of work for some publishers, and even if I was only partly employed, it would have still been, enough money that I was able to pay the bills and things like that. As it turns out, it's been far more successful, and I'm using quotes, successful, than I ever imagined, in that I've been working 50 to 80 hours a week every week for the last 3 years with no break, which is not good, but it just shows that there is that amount of work out there to be done, and publishers are constantly, most of my regular publishers that I work for are asking me to do more and more and more, and I don't have the capacity to do it. So that's good in a way that I'm not short of work, and in fact I'm having to turn down a number of offers of rules videos and rule books and everything else because I don't have time to do it. So I couldn't be happier about that. Because it could have been a complete disaster, and I could be working in a chip shop. I mean, I don't know anybody else who does what I do, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I mean, I don't know anybody else who, because obviously you've got people who create rules videos, you've got people who edit rule books, you've got people who work as demo staff at conventions, and you have people that work as game developers and game testers. And I'm sure there are people that do little bits of each, but I do the whole lot. I'm doing everything. But every single aspect of my job is about teaching people how to play games. The rule books that I write is teaching you how to play a game. The videos is teaching you how to play a game. When I'm working at a convention, I'm doing demos, I'm teaching you how to play a game. Guess what I wanted to be when I was growing up?
I have no clue.
A teacher.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. I always wanted to be a teacher. My whole plan when I was really young was to be a teacher. And I was naturally good at physics at school. So my life plan when I was at school was to get a teacher training degree and start teaching physics to students. That's what I wanted to do. So obviously there is a part of my personality which goes back a very, very long way that loves imparting knowledge on people. And that's carried through into board games.
And I want to get to more of the personal teaching side, because a lot of the questions we got on the Guild had to do with best ways of teaching games. But I want to stick to the professional side just for a little bit for now. Jack Lou was curious, how much input do you have for editing rule books when a company contacts you?
This is interesting because I was talking to another rulebook editor a few weeks ago now about how he does his editing compared to how I do my editing. And his is very different. So if a publisher was to send him a rulebook in a PDF format, for example, then he would go onto that PDF, he'd save it locally, he'd make some comments on it, and then he'd send them a copy of the file back, right? Me, I go, no, we're not going to work that way. This is the way we're going to work. I'm very, I don't know what the right word is. I don't shy away from upsetting people. I don't deliberately go out of my way to upset people, but I want to do things the right way. So if somebody sends me a local PDF, I'll say, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to save the PDF to Dropbox, and we're going to use the inbuilt online Dropbox commenting system, and we're going to do and we're going to edit it and proofread it collaboratively online at the same time. That's how we're going to do it. And they go, oh, I didn't even know this feature existed in Dropbox. And I'm like, no, you didn't, but this is what we're now going to use. Because although I'm a hired gun, I am the mercenary that has been paid to do this piece of work. If I see that piece of work can be done in a more efficient or a better way, then I'm going to suggest that. And I have no problems with telling a publisher and saying, look, I'm sorry, but your rulebook is a complete and utter disaster. We need to go to Google Docs. We need to start throwing it in the bin, and we need to write it from scratch with the Google Docs. So I have a lot of input in the process that we follow. In terms of the rulebook editing, this is another interesting one as well, because not a lot of people know this, but I was actually having a very late night discussion last night with a certain Czech designer, where I was, because with CG, as I mentioned earlier on, their rulebooks are fantastic, and I might get involved a little bit near the end, and I'll go, oh, that sentence isn't quite clear, can you change it? And they'll change it, and that's it. You know, I have very little input. But other publishers, I almost write the rulebook from scratch sometimes. So I was having a chat with Larger about the work I do for other publishers. And it's interesting because I think probably more than 50% of the games where I was hired as a rulebook editor, I've actually changed the rules of the game. And I'm not saying I did that without telling the publisher, oh, I'm editing the rulebook and I'll just change this while I'll tell them about it. But I can't turn off my game developer role, and I can't turn off me as a gamer. So I would probably say more than 50% of the rulebooks that I've edited over the last year, I have had some input on the actual rules of the game, because I can't turn off the game developer that's in me, and I can't turn off the gamer that's in me. So if I'm reading a rule and I'm going, that doesn't sound very good, as a rule or as a game or gameplay or something like that, I can't turn it off. So I will always say to them, I said, look, do you mind if I make some suggestions about the game itself? And they all say, sure, yeah, go ahead. None of them say, no, we hired you to just edit the rulebook. Don't tell us about the game. They're all very open to it. And I will actually go on and I will make a number of suggestions about how the game actually plays. Now, sometimes those are very minor things, and sometimes they can be quite major. But yeah, I do have... So one of the ones that I'm working on at the moment, just to give you a little bit of an example, it's for a new game called Center Shaft. It's a new publisher. I don't think they've had any games before. And one of the items in the game allows you to teleport another player to another space on the board, okay? Now, there's a rule in the game that there are certain spaces on the board where when you move onto that space, something happens. So I asked the question, and I said, so if I was to use this rod of teleportation on you, and I move you onto one of those spaces, what happens? And they said, well, nothing happens. And I said, well, that's a bit confusing, because we've already said in the rules, if you move onto that space, something happens. And we're now saying that if somebody teleports you onto the space, it doesn't happen. I said, wouldn't it be cleaner to just say, you cannot teleport somebody onto one of those spaces? And they went, yeah, okay. And I changed the rules. So yes, I do have a bit of an input on the rule books that I'm editing.
Got it. What is the worst rule you've ever seen in a draft? You don't have to name names, I guess, or maybe you do. The
worst rule or the worst rule book?
Let's do the first one and then the second one.
Well, the worst rule, that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one, because there's lots. That one I mentioned just now, that rule would have been fine. It was just a bit quirky. I have seen other rules that are like, no, hang on a minute, this is actually nonsense. This doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and is completely crazy. And sometimes they'll change it and sometimes they don't. I am working on one at the moment, and I won't name any names, but there's a rule in there that basically says, if you go on this space, you have to do the action. So you're not allowed to just go there and not do the action to deny somebody else the space, which is standard worker placement stuff. That's all fine. But you can game the system in... So if there's a space that requires you to have an orange, and then there's another space before it where you go and get the orange, then you could just go on the second space, not go on the first space, block somebody from the second space and say, well, I'm sorry, but I don't have the orange, so I now can't do it. Okay? And there's a rule in there to say that although this is legal in the rules wise, you shouldn't do it because it's against the spirit of the game. Now, I've highlighted that in the document and said, hang on a minute, is it legal or is it not legal? You can't tell me it's legal, but then tell me not to do it because it's against the spirit of the game. That, for me, that's not black or white. That's like, well, hang on a minute, you're saying that it's allowed by the rules of the game, and I can absolutely understand why they've done it, and I don't think there's a fix for it, because you cannot make it illegal There's no way. The rules it's so complicated. You can't actually make that illegal. But to say that people shouldn't do it, I'm like, and I always think of games in terms of you're at a tournament and you're playing a game, therefore you've got to play by the rules. So if I was at a tournament and I was playing this game and I did that move, what's somebody going to do? Is somebody going to call me out and say, you're not allowed to do that because it's against the spirit? I'm like, hang on a minute, it's a tournament. The rules of the game allow me to do this. You're just saying that it's not a nice... So yeah, so that was a very odd rule, and I've queried it and I've said, look, it's your game, you're the designer, but I said this is a very odd rule to have in a rule book. But yeah, worst rule book. Oh God, there's loads.
Hard to pick one?
Well, I'll give you one. I have done a number of rule books for Portal games. Now, Portal games have a reputation for horrendous rule books. That's not insulting them. They know this. But it's become it was a running joke with Portal games that their rule books were terrible. There was a period of time where they employed me to do their rulebook edits. And I would like to think that in that time, the rulebooks that they did were pretty good. I no longer do rulebook editing for Portal games. They've changed their internal processes and they don't need me anymore. But the 51st State Master Set was one of the rulebooks that I edited. And Ignacy sent me a copy of it, and it came through as a Word document, and I read through it, and I was like, hang on a minute, this is complete nonsense. And what was interesting is 51st State was an older game. It had already come out years and years ago, and the rulebook was terrible, absolutely terrible. But Imperial Settlers had a really good rulebook. And 51st State and Imperial Settlers are almost the same game. So I went back to Ignacy and I said, what's this that you've sent me? You know, because it looks like it's the old 51st State rulebook with a few word changes. And he went, yeah, that's what it is. And I'm like, well, why didn't you take the Imperial Settlers rulebook and base the new 51st State rulebook off that one? And he said, well, I got an intern to write it. So basically I got this Word document that was gibberish. It was just complete gibberish. And I said to Ignacy, I said, I'd like your permission to throw this in the bin and basically start writing a new rulebook from scratch using the Imperial Settlers rulebook as a guideline in terms of structure and even a lot of the wording as well. And he said yes, and that's what we did. And then after we'd done the rough structure and everything else, he then went in and added all his bits and added all of the swearing, which I then took some of the swearing out, and the final rulebook got done. But yes, the initial one that I received from him was a Word document written by an intern based on the original 51st State game, and it just made no sense at all. It was just gobbledygook. Yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah.
When you look at the landscape of rule books, is there a rule that is consistently wrong, that or something that companies consistently get wrong with rule books?
Different companies get different things wrong. I've been having a discussion with Czech Games Edition because they don't put components list in any of their rule books. They did in the latest one because I spent 3 months arguing and eventually they put it in to shut me up. And I'm hoping that they start doing this from then on. But CGE games do not have generally speaking, do not have an itemized components list at the start of the rulebook, which I think is a big no-no. Okay? Other publishers will constantly make other things, which I would class as mistakes. For example, one of my big things is that rulebooks should be gender neutral. And I read so many rulebooks now that say, he picks up his cards and puts them into his hand, and it infuriates the hell out of me because it's wrong. You should not do that. It should say either his or her, or even better, it should say their, because his or her is now not fully inclusive. So all the rule books that I write are gender neutral, and they use they and their and everything else. So when I look at rule books that still say he, I think that's wrong. Now, I totally understand why some of them do it. It's because a lot of them are European, and in European languages, A lot of things are given male or female names. So in French, for example, it's, la table. So tables are female. So every single object in the world is given either a male thing or a female thing. So they are used to calling things by he or she. So for them, it's not a problem. So that's why a lot of rule books that are written by European people, they put he or she in there, and they don't see a problem with it. And everybody in their country doesn't see a problem with it. It's just people like me that do see a problem with it. So that's something that I have been campaigning about for years, and every publisher that I've worked with, I have basically insisted that if I'm going to edit their rulebook, that it's going to be made gender neutral. And I'm pleased to say that, I've had a lot of success with that.
All right, let's transition a little bit more into the learning and teaching side of things, where we got quite a few questions. And I will say this, as Sean can attest, I am a pain in the neck when it comes to teaching me a game. And I'm okay learning games myself, but being taught a game is tough. So this is important stuff, at least in my mind.
I'd love the challenge. Next time we are at a convention together, pick a game and I'll teach you.
Honestly, if you can teach me Through the Ages, I think Sean would be very grateful.
I can get you playing Through the Ages within 1 minute.
Okay. And actually I think that's the first question I'll go to here.
Yes.
From BJ from Board Game Gumbo asks, what are your best tips for getting people playing the game as quickly as possible, even in a heavy game, without going over all the rules and putting people to sleep first, which is my biggest frustration with learning, for instance, say, a Vital Lacerda game.
Oh, yeah. So my best advice is to support me on Patreon, because then when I reach my $300 goal, I'm producing a video on how I demo games. But I'll give you a sneak preview. I've been working on this method for teaching games for about 3 years now. And I've been using it at conventions for 3 years. And it's a very unusual method, but I came up with it based on, I spent years researching and talking to people about demos at conventions and what they liked and what they didn't like and what worked and what didn't work. I spent a long time on this. And then I spent about a year to a year and a half developing this style myself and practicing it myself. And now I use this at all conventions everywhere, and CGE have now adopted it for all of their conventions. Everywhere they go to, they now use this method. So at Gen Con last year, we had 35 demo staff all using this method. And we had so much positive feedback, both at the event itself and afterwards, from people saying, wow, CGE used this strange method for teaching us how to play a game, and I didn't think it would work, but it really, really did. So the method is one in which, if I was to explain it to you, and some of your listeners are going to listen to it and they're going to go, that's not going to work for me, because there is some resistance to it, but I can promise you, and this isn't just me saying it, it does work. And the basic principle of Paul Grogan's interactive drip feed demo method, patent pending, is to get you started playing as soon as possible. This is a demo. I am now going to give you a demo of this game. The whole point of this demo is to get you up and running and playing the game as soon as possible. When we might not even play a full game if this is a convention, yeah? We might not play a full game. Even if we do play a full game, it doesn't matter who wins, because this is your first game. Your first game is a learning game anyway. You're not going to come up with the best strategy ever right from, your first game of it. So this is a learning game. The whole point of this is to learn how the game plays. And with that as the introduction, we go into playing in it. And basically, you only teach people the rules that you need at that point in the game. As long as you write off it as a learning game, and I can get you playing Through the Ages within a minute, probably less, to be honest. No, probably a minute, let's say a minute. And within a minute, you will be playing Through the Ages. And that saves you listening to 45 minutes of rules explanation. Because at a convention, who wants to sit there and listen to 45 minutes of somebody talking? Because studies have shown, and as I say, I've done a lot of research on this, that after about 4 minutes, people switch off. Now, not everybody. If you're the person that can sit there and listen to somebody talk at you for 45 minutes and remember every single thing they've said, and then play a game, remembering every single rule that you were just taught, then all credit to you. That's brilliant. But most people can't do that. Most people have a limit of how much knowledge they can absorb, and that's actually a very small amount. So it's get them up and playing as soon as possible, and don't explain all of the rules ahead of time. Which, as I say, if I was teaching my friends how to play a game on a normal weeknight, I would not use this method whatsoever, because that's not what we do. It's a method specifically designed for demos at conventions, but it can be. So if you came round to my house tonight and we decided to play Through the Ages, I would use that method. I wouldn't sit and talk to you for 45 minutes, because Through the Ages is a bit special because it's such a super heavy complex game. But if it was another game, for example, I probably would tell you all of the rules beforehand before we started playing. But at a convention, that's not what I do.
Is there a preferred order when you are teaching all the rules at once that you think folks should use? The one that I've always heard is tell people the objective, tell people the end game first, and then kind of fill in the back from there. Is that how you approach it?
Work backwards. Quite often, work backwards. I mean, I've been teaching people how to play games since I was 13. I've been probably every single week of my life, without fail, I've taught somebody how to play a game in one way, shape or form. Going back to when I was 12 or 13 and I was doing role-playing games, I was always the guy who hosted and everything else. So it's, start backwards. So games with score pads, Clans of Caledonia, Railroad Revolution, Snowdonia, things like that. Yeah. First thing I do, I explain the theme. Right, this is a game where it's in Scotland and we're building up our economy and we're going to be producing whiskey and all of this sort of stuff. Ultimately, the aim is about getting as many points as you can over the course of 5 rounds. I'm now going to get out the score pad and I'm going to show you all of the different ways we can get points, some of which won't make sense at the moment, but I'll come back to them later. So straight away, within 20 seconds, 30 seconds, you're playing a game, it's set in Scotland, you're trying to get points, and now Paul's going to go through all of the different ways that you get points. So start with the objective, set the scene, and then explain what you're trying to do. And then you go backwards from there. I mean, I've had demos from some people, including some friends of mine, and friends of mine, it's funny, when they teach me a game, they get nervous because they know that I teach people games for a living and that I'm a professional at it. So when they're like, oh, Paul wants me to teach them how to play a game, they get really nervous. I'm like, look, it'll be fine. And then they'll get the game out and they'll go, right, there's 4 different actions you can do in this game. This action allows you, and I'm like, stop. Hang on a minute. What's the game about? They've and that's not me going out of my way to upset them, but literally, some people sit down and they say, right, there's 4 different actions you can do in this game, and I'm like, no, that's not an introduction to the game. I need to know the basics. I need to know, right, this game is about rebuilding the capital city of Portugal after it was destroyed. The game's going to play over a period of rounds, and the winner of the game is the one that's got the most wigs at the end of the game. We all take it in turns, and on your turn you can do 4 actions. Now I'll explain the 4 different actions. Right, there you go. But you need that initial bit of information at the start. Context
is key.
Yes.
Nick Hayes was curious about, in general, besides the flow of how you teach it, do you have any tips on becoming more comfortable with teaching?
I've been doing it so long that I'm comfortable with it because I've been doing it so long, and that I know I'm pretty good at doing it, and for 20 years people have told me that I'm good at doing it. So that's how I've become comfortable with it, is just through doing it a lot. And I'm better now than I was 10, 15 years ago because I've learned along the way. So let's just say you're starting out, and let's say you're not very good. Learn from it. Watch people's faces. When you're teaching them, watch their faces. If you explain a rule and they're all sat there and they're staring blankly, they don't get it. So be able to read the people, and then adapt accordingly. And that's how I've got better at my style, is by finding out what works and what doesn't. Knowing the game yourself beforehand can be very important. Now, we've sat down on a normal games night at my house and we have learned some games together from the rulebook. Okay? It sometimes doesn't work, especially if the rulebook's not very good. But let's go with the situation that you're teaching a game that you know. How do you get more comfortable with that? Just make sure that you maybe do some preparation. Just do a little bit of preparation first and say, right, Paul said, tell people about the theme of the game first, right, for like 20 seconds, right? Then tell people how long the game lasts. Is it a fixed number of rounds, whatever? Tell people what the objective of the game is, how you actually win the game, and then start going into the detail. But make sure that you tell the people who you are teaching that at any point, if they've got any questions, just stop you and ask. But my biggest advice is don't explain too much in too much detail before it's relevant. So for example, Through the Ages is a game divided into 3 ages. The wars don't come out until age 2. So even if I was teaching you the game and I taught you all of the rules up front, I still wouldn't explain the wars until age 2. I would just mention that in age 2, there are going to be these wars that come out. So if you didn't think that your military strength was important in age 1, it will be more important in age 2 when the wars come. That's all you need to know. You need to know that in age 2, there will be these wars. Then when we get to age 2, we then explain the wars. What you don't want to do is you don't want to go, oh, we're in age 2 now. Right, well, let me now tell you about the wars. Oh, you haven't increased your military strength. I'm now going to crush you. That's not fair. So I'm not saying tell them all of the rules up front, but just tell them something so that you don't, so that it doesn't come as a complete surprise. So I was teaching Keeper at BGGCon to Isaac Childress and John Getz Games. And Keeper has a rule that basically you're all taking it in turns to place your keeples on the board. And when you run out of keeples, you get to reuse your existing ones, which is really good, and you get a bonus. I didn't tell them that, and it really annoyed them. But it worked. Because I basically said, because you have the option within Keeper to join other people, and if you join other people, it means you using your keeples on your turn instead of somebody else's turn, which means you'll run out faster, right? So I said to them, I said, look, if you were to join him, then this would happen and this would happen, and it means you would run out of your keeples faster, which is a good thing. Well, why is it a good thing? You don't need to know why it's a good thing. You really don't. It is a good thing. And remember, this is your first game. It's a learning game. Don't worry about it too much, but something good will happen to you when you run out of your things before everybody else. Okay? 10 minutes later, he was like, oh, I'd really like to know what happens when I run out. And I said, no, you don't need to know. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Just keep playing them. So he ran out of all these keeples before everybody else. And I said, right, now you've run out of them. This is what happens. And he was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And I'm like, well, I did tell everybody. I said, running out of your keeples early is a good thing. As long as you say that. Now, some people are not going to like that. Some people will say, oh, that's completely unfair. You should have explained what happened earlier on. But Keeper is it's a complex game. And I didn't want to overload people with too much information at an early stage. So all I felt they needed to know, and I've used this method before with other people, is if you run out of your keeples before other people, that's really good, and you'll get to do something that nobody else will be able to do. Tell them that, and then when they run out of the keeples, then they go, oh, I can do this, yeah. And then the other people are going, oh, I wish I'd have run out of mine early. And I'm like, well, I did tell you. So, yeah, as I say, write off your first game as a learning game, and it's fine.
It should be fine for most people, but I know that there are plenty of competitive folks out there who, even in their first game, want to win.
And wanting to win is absolutely fine. But as I say, if you're telling me that these people can sit and listen to an hour's rules explanation and then formulate an entire strategy based on an hour of dumping of information, why I'm saying you can still be competitive even not knowing every single rule at the start. So Agra is a really complex game. And somebody I know taught that to a group of people a couple of weeks ago, and it took them an hour and a quarter. An hour and a quarter of sitting sitting, listening to somebody talking at them before they even moved a piece, right? The last time I taught Agra, we were playing within 15 minutes. And that's not just because I talk fast, because I don't. It's because I only taught them what they actually needed to know at that point. They didn't need to know all of the details of all of these other spaces to the nth degree when on your first turn in Agra there are only 5 spaces that you can do. You can't use the sailor, you can't use the builder, and you can't use the trader. So I won't explain them. On the first turn of the game, I only explain the 5 spaces that you can use. And it gets people playing within about 10 or 15 minutes. And we played the game and it took us 2.5 hours and people enjoyed it and they liked it. They were, they felt they were competitive. They didn't feel, or if I'd have known how the builder worked on my first turn when I couldn't even use it, it's like, nah, it doesn't work. So yeah, and this is the years of research that I did was speaking to many, many, many people who went to conventions and said, oh, I had a demo and I just sat there and they just talked to me for 30 minutes. And it was bored. It doesn't work in a convention environment. Not like, the Gen Cons or your Essens or anything like that, really.
Switching over to the learning side of things, Nick
Yes.
Hayes was curious. Do you recommend learning a game by yourself, solo, or in a group?
I never learn solo. I much prefer learning as a group. Yeah. But I'm not a big solo gamer. I much prefer having people round and we'll learn it together. And as I say, sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes we've got halfway through a game that we were learning from the rulebook and we've packed it away because the rules were so bad and unclear. None of us actually knew what we were doing or how to play and it just became too confusing. So we gave up. But other times it can be a great experience for everybody. And not everybody has. I mean, I don't have the time to sit down and learn the game that we might be playing tonight, for example. So we might learn that from the rulebook, or we might just play Merlin again, because I played that on Wednesday and that was good. So yeah, a lot of people do that, but I personally don't. If people have time and there is an instructional video by either me, Rodney, or somebody else, then watch that. I personally find playthrough videos the best, but not everybody has the 2 to 3 hours to watch a playthrough video. My videos tend to be 20 to 30 minutes, and that's the full rules. Whereas the playthrough video is normally a couple of hours at least, if not more. So, yeah. And then the other way is sitting down and reading the rulebook. But you're always going to miss something. The advantage with a playthrough video is because it's so long, assuming that the playthrough video is correct, of course. So if you watch any from John Gets Games, he does my favourite playthrough videos. I trust what's in there because he uses annotations afterwards to fix any problems that he made in there. So by the time I come to watch one of John's videos, I know that what I'm seeing is correct. There's nothing worse than watching a playthrough video of somebody playing incorrectly without annotations, because then that means you go away and you start playing the game incorrectly as well, which is not good. I've got a bit of a thing about people playing games correctly. You know when you're at a games group and you're sat there playing a game and some jerk comes over and says, "Excuse me, but I can't help overhearing, but I think you're playing this rule wrong." Well, that's me. And it's because a big part of my personality is that people should be playing, unless they're playing by house rules, which is fine, people should be playing by the correct rules. And if people are on the next table, even if I don't know them, and my ears prick up and I hear that they're playing a rule wrong, I'll go over and I will, because in my mind, I'm helping them. In their mind, I'm some jerk who's interrupting them and telling them that they're doing it wrong. But in my mind, I am helping them play the game as it should be played. And I can't stop myself because me caring about what people think about me is less than my desire for people to be playing a game by the correct rules. And therefore, I make myself look like a jerk in doing so. But at least I'm happy with the fact that, they're now playing by the right rules. So, yeah, that's what I do.
With complicated games that might really be hard to get off of your shelf of shame because they are as heavy as they are,
Yeah.
Let's say there isn't a playthrough or how to play video available for them, which for a lot of games there isn't.
Yeah.
How would you attack that, or what? Do you have any tips for attacking that?
Yeah, I would, first of all, I would contact a few of my friends who I know who are comfortable with games of that complexity. I would probably arrange a date and say, right, next Friday, we're going to play this. Can you each have a quick look at the rules beforehand? And then we'll sit down and we'll do it. Because a game like that, a game of the complexity of something like, any of Vital Lacerda's games or Gloomhaven or anything like that, and I've said this online so much, I've said, look, please send all of your players the link to my video, just because I want 4 views instead of 1. No, it's not that. It's because it's unfair for all of that responsibility to be on one person. When we played Lisboa the first 2 times, I got rules wrong. When we played Gloomhaven the first few times, I got rules wrong. I am not this, everybody thinks, when we'll go around to Paul's house and we'll play a game and it'll be absolutely 100% correct. No, it won't be. If it's a super heavy, complex game, we're going to make mistakes. That's just how it is. And then we'll learn about those mistakes afterwards and we'll get them right next time. So getting people who I know and trust, getting each of them to read the rule book, and then we all rock up and we sit down and we go, right, we're going to play this. We've all read the rules. Yeah, right. Off we go. And then it's a shared experience. And by the end of it, we would have had a far better chance of playing it correctly. Because anything that I misremembered or read incorrectly, somebody else will have read incorrectly as well. Now, there is another very, very important thing which I don't do, but everybody else should do. And the reason I don't do it is that I've got a friend of mine that does it for me. And that is, after you've played a game, go back and read the rules. Or watch the video. Because the amount of times that the day after we've played a game that my friend Robert has mailed me and said, I was reading through the rules again and we played this rule wrong last night. And it's surprising, considering he read the rules beforehand and then we played the game, reading them again afterwards, somehow it unlocks some secret things that were in there before that you maybe didn't see when you first read them, but after you've played it, they suddenly spring out, and that's been really, really helpful. So I know with complex games that's a lot to ask, but but yeah, go back afterwards and just reread if you have the time and the capacity to do so. Or if you didn't watch a video before, watch a video afterwards. Or if you watched a video but didn't read the rules, do something after your first game just to make sure that you got everything right.
Mark Tattersall had a long list of questions, primarily about the hobby in the UK.
Yes, Mark. Oh.
He was curious whether the general growth of the hobby in the UK in recent years, what you think about it, and whether you think it'll continue. And add on to that, will Brexit put a break on things?
I've no idea about Brexit. I am terrified about it, and I've no idea what difference it's actually going to make. For the games industry and for me personally, considering a lot of my clients are European. I really don't know how it's all going to play out. The growth of the hobby, obviously the hobby's growing. You only need to look at how many, the attendance figures for the UK Games Expo. If you just look at that graph over the last few years and compare it to the growth in number of attendees at places like Essen and Origins and Gen Con and things like that, the growth at the UK Games Expo is massive. I think 2 years ago it went up by 80%. Last year it went up by 30%. Origins last year dropped, and Gen Con this year dropped. Because Gen Con this year, they did the odd thing by saying, it's sold out. For the first time ever, it's sold out. And they actually had less attendees than last year because they restricted the ticket sales more than they did. It's weird. It's really weird. I mean, still a lot of people. So yeah, it's growing. So does that mean it's growing bigger? It's growing more in the UK than it is in America? I don't know, because Gen Con was restricted numbers. Essen this year was bigger than it has been before, with more people. And you could tell that just by the queues to the toilets that were far more than last year. So it is growing. My gut feeling is that it is probably growing in the UK faster than elsewhere, but that's simply based on attendance figures at UK Games Expo. I don't have any hard figures on number of sales or anything like that. We have an increasing number of board game cafes. We had the first one 4 years ago now, I think, and they're popping up everywhere. You know, there's one a month opening, and they're all. I think a couple of them might have not worked out and closed, but on the whole, they're all there, and they are still going. And they must be attracting new people into the hobby, because I think the board game cafe target audience is not me. Why would I contact my group of friends and say, I'll tell you what, shall we go down to this board game cafe and buy an overpriced coffee, an overpriced sandwich, and pay £5 for a table to play a game, when you can just come round my house? Yeah? So I'm all for the board game cafes and I support them, but I don't think I'm their target audience. But the fact that all of these board game cafes have opened and are being successful means that more people are getting into the hobby. Because I think a lot of non-gamers will go to these cafes and then they would probably get into the gaming hobby because of it.
Here's the thing with me. I don't have enough friends for a board game cafe to not work.
So do you go to your local one?
Not in St. Louis. I've been to Pieces a few times. Here and there, often with folks from work and for some game nights. There's a really good gaming scene in St. Louis in general. Right. Back in Albuquerque, that was a regular haunt. Empire Board Game Library is every Wednesday is Dukes of Dice game night. I will say they're getting so busy from a lot of folks attending that it's actually made it a little bit trickier, because we'll get a decent crowd for that, but then they'll also get a decent crowd on their own because their business is growing and expanding. So. Right. That's what I've heard. That's what the little birdies back in Albuquerque have told me, in any case.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a different perspective on it, because I've hosted game nights at my house once or twice a week for 15 years. So when these board game cafes popped up, I was like, well, as I say, it's not for me. You know, there's no incentive for me to go there when, you know, I've got X hundred games in my collection and my friends who come round have got X hundred games in their collection. We've got all the games we want. We don't need anybody to teach us how to play a game. And, you know, paying to be in there, we wouldn't do that. Now, if you're organising, you know, a Dukes of Dice event or something else at a local board game cafe, and then it becomes more of a sort of social event. And that's a different kind of thing. But did you not have a gaming club that you went to before the cafe?
Prior to that, Sean and I went to Active Imagination, and they would have a board game night on Thursdays that we would attend. Didn't have the same kind of pricing structure, reserve a table or coffee available or sandwiches available. You know, they'd have frozen foods. It was your typical friendly local game store. Kind of experience. And they had a board game night, and that's where we would attend. We would also every now and then play games over at Sean's house.
Right.
So it was a mix of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one of those people that goes out to a cafe and has a $5 sandwich and a $5 coffee. You know, I very rarely leave the house most days. So, you know, I'm not your typical person. The idea of going to a cafe and spending all of that money on coffee and a sandwich is just not in my thing. So, I don't do that. I'll make it myself, I think. Yeah.
See, I'm not that good at making sandwiches, so that might be my big problem.
Well, it's 2 pieces of bread, something in between, and then you eat it, and that's it.
No, there's an art to it. There's an art to it, right? No, I'm just
there
kidding.
Is.
So before we wrap things up, I usually like to do a few more of the fun questions or broader questions or whatever the case might be. I'll start with Daniel Newman. I want to adapt one of his questions. He was asking, best rulebook you saw last year, 2017, that you didn't work on. I'm going to expand this. What's the best rulebook you've ever seen?
Oh, ever is difficult. Because of my memory. Great Western Trail and Mombasa. William Niebling is the editor. But the thing is, a rulebook, putting together a good rulebook is a combination of the text and the graphic design and the layout. So I don't know exactly who to thank for the Great Western Trail rulebook, because it's a fantastic rulebook. I learned to play that game from the rulebook. Everything was in there. It was all clear. Every single thing that happened in the game was answered in the rulebook. And the one rule that we got wrong for our first 4 games was in the rulebook in a big red box saying important. So the fact that we got it wrong is not that it wasn't clear in the rulebook, it's because I missed it. And the layout and everything else is all really, really good. So, and Mombassa's the same. So it's the same style. So it's the same team of people that did Mombasa and Great Western Trail. So whoever they are, thank you as a gamer for doing that. It was really, really good. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good rule books out there. There's a lot of terrible rule books out there. So, yeah, I mean, I was reading the one for Meeple Circus this morning because I was having this discussion with Larger last night. The Meeple Circus rulebook came up. I looked at it this morning and I was like, seriously? And it's just, it looks pretty, but it's not functional. It's just, and you know, it frustrates me because I'm working with some publishers, small publishers, who have done one game, who are paying to get a professional rulebook editor to check the rulebook. Yet you've got other companies that are bigger companies that are not taking the care and attention it needs to get the rulebook looking good. And yeah, it's just a bit frustrating. But yeah, there's a lot of good rulebooks out there. As I say, Great Western Trail and Mombasa were two of my ones that I've read recently that I thought were really good. And as I say, both of those games, I don't think I had any questions afterwards. And I don't think anything happened in the game at all which wasn't covered in the rulebook. And that's rare. You know, even a good rulebook, you're probably going to have a question that comes up during the game which isn't in the rulebook, and somebody asks it on Board Game Geek and you get an official answer. But yeah, with those rulebooks, I didn't have any questions, from what I remember.
Daniel Newman, curious also as well, how many hours do you sleep at night?
Yeah, Daniel is concerned by the bags under my eyes getting worse and worse. I have sleep-related issues. So the amount of sleep I get per night depends on my current mental state and stuff that's going on in my life. And it can vary from 2 to 7, generally speaking. Yeah. It's very rare that I'll get more than 7. But yeah, that does account for the bags under the eyes in some of my videos. But, you know, when you've got a video to do and you haven't slept properly for 4 days, then what do? Makeup, maybe. Strangest
demo experience you've ever had at a con?
Oh, I've had a few. So there's one experience that I had, Gen Con last year. Family sat down. I taught them how to play Galaxy Trucker. So mum, dad, son and daughter. The son and daughter were about, I'm going to say 10 or 11. I might be wrong by a couple of years. They built the ships. I explained the rule. Now, that is a game which you can't start playing without explaining the rules. You've got to explain the rules about how the ship building works before you actually play it. So we did that. They built the ship. We then go on the adventure. We draw a card. It's the asteroids. The asteroids come in. The sun loses one small piece off his ship, you know, off the right-hand side, and starts crying.
Oh, no.
I felt terrible. I'm like, and the mum was going, it's okay, it's all right. And I was thinking, but that's kind of the fun of the game. And he was like, yeah, he lost one small piece off his ship.
Oh, boy.
And he started crying. So that was a little unusual. I've never had that happen before. There was one experience that we had, and this wasn't me doing the demo, but it was one of my team at Origins this year who told me about it. And it was using the demo method. So we had a ticketed system for a learn-to-play game of Tzolk'in, no experience required. And it's a learn-to-play game, okay? And that's what it was advertised as. So 3 people turned up for this session. 2 of them had no idea. They saw the game and they wanted to learn how to play it. They knew nothing about it. One guy played it 20 times. He just wanted to play it. He was like, well, I just want to play. And this was my only opportunity to play the game by booking a ticket. So I'm just here to play. I don't want to learn. So we were like, okay, well, I'm sorry, but you're welcome to play, but this is a learn to play session. And we are going to have to, you know, explain to the other players how to play first. So he said, oh, okay. And then we gave them the introduction. We said, look, the way that we run our demos at Czech Games Edition is we're not going to teach you all of the rules beforehand. We're just going to start playing. And over the course of the next hour, you will gradually learn. And by the end of this, you will know how to play. But we will teach you as we go. And this guy went, well, that's not going to work. And we were like, well, I'm sorry, but this is the way This is the way we do things. So we started doing the demos, and we started, and we don't, Tolkien, we don't explain every single action space on every single gear. We just explain that the longer you leave them, the better they get. And we give them a very, very brief overview of what the different gears do. And then say, right, stick one down somewhere. Do you want to stick a second one? Yeah, okay, right. And you basically just get people to make effectively random moves at the start of the game because it doesn't really matter. And he was like, he kept butting in and he kept trying to say, oh, well, if you go there and you leave it 4 turns, then you'll be... And we had to interrupt him and we had to say, I'm sorry, but would you mind? Anyway, it was really difficult. At the end of the game, he came up and he apologised. He said, I'm really sorry for what I said. I've now seen the method that you use. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I'm now going to start using that method to teach all of my friends how to play. It was so good. We could not believe the turnaround that this guy had. He had like an epiphany. Halfway through, he suddenly thought, oh, wait a minute, this is a really good teaching method. And he said, that was really good, and I got to play with some new people, and I liked the way you demoed it. And it was so rewarding because the guy on my team who was running that demo was sat there for an hour and a half, like thinking, oh no, you're feeling bad on behalf of this other guy, whilst also trying to demo. And then at the end, for him to come over, apologise, and say our method was so good, he's now going to start using it. It was like, it was one of those uplifting moments that that we went through. So yeah, that was quite an experience. But we've had lots of different experiences.
There's a small part of me that hopes he lost that game. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, he might have done. Who knows?
I strongly doubt it, but there's just knowing how that game is. But there's a small part of me that was hoping maybe that didn't work out so well for that guy. I don't know. All right, my final question. I ask it to everyone as my very last question of the interview. Daniel Newman on the Guild tried to steal this question, but this is my question. I ask it every single time. Paul, if you could be any flavor of ice cream, which flavor would you be and why?
Probably salted caramel with pecans. Yeah. Why? I mean, I don't know whether I would be that flavour of ice cream, but that's the flavour of ice. Yeah.
This isn't a favourite flavour question. This is what flavour would you, Paul Grogan of Gaming Rules, be?
How have other people answered this question?
Oh, no. Okay, I'll give you my answer that I tend to give.
Okay.
People always turn it around on me. I would be mint chocolate chip because I tend to be bright and optimistic, but there's still that substance there, right? There's still that sort of chocolatey substance. So that's an answer to that question.
So it's
Jamie Stegmaier went with chocolate decadence, which is now my new nickname for it.
So a type of ice cream that reflects my personality. Oh gosh, something. I would probably say a few different flavours of ice cream. You know when you go to an ice cream parlour and you say, I'll have one of those waffle cones with 3 different flavours on it. I'll have that. 3 different scoops of very, very different flavoured ice cream.
What would some of those flavours be?
Well, one of them would probably be very dark and probably not very nice. And then another one would be all very bright and exciting and probably contain, those things that when you put in your mouth, they fizz. Whatever they're called over there. Yeah, one of them would probably be an ice cream with lots of bits of that in it. So as you take a bite, you get that, and that's a bit of a surprise. And then the other one would probably be salted caramel with pecans. Just because just because that's
that's a good flavor, good choice, and a solid enough answer. I will accept that answer. So
okay,
yeah. Thank you for playing in my space on that one.
That's okay.
Excellent. That'll just about do it for this one. Paul, if folks want to reach out to you in the future, either to give you even more work, or just to talk about rules, or to follow along, or learn how to play, or whatever the case might be, what is the best way for them to do so?
So there's a few ways. I'm on Twitter at Gaming Rules Vids, but Twitter, if you're not there for that 5 minutes when I post something, you'll miss it. So Gaming Rules is also on Facebook. But again, the way that Facebook algorithms work is it decides itself whether you want to see the information or not. So, for example, my partner, who is actually You know, she likes Gaming Rules, and every time Gaming Rules posts something, she clicks like and everything else. She doesn't see most of the stuff that the Gaming Rules Facebook page posts because Facebook decides she doesn't want to see it. So anyway, there's Facebook. There's also the BGG Guild. I do have a Board Game Geek Guild, but the main place I would probably say is my YouTube channel. So it's Gaming Rules videos. I post all of my rules videos there, but I also post my podcasts, my monthly video logs that I've just started doing, my monthly Q&A sessions that I do as well. So if anybody has any other questions for me, I will be doing a live Q&A at some point later this month. So everything's on the YouTube channel.
Excellent, excellent. Paul, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on the show, and enjoy the rest of your day.